Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we have the pleasure of welcome Dr. Marc Gitzinger, the founder and the CEO of BioVersys. I'm Hindle-Yang, the CEO at the MSQ Ventures, a New York-based cross-border advisory firm specialized in the life science. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us. Today, we have the pleasure of welcome Dr. Marc Gitzinger, the founder and CEO of BioVersys. I'm Hindle-Yang, the CEO at MSQ Ventures, a New York-based cross-border advisory firm specialized in the life science. We are pleased to co-host this webinar with Bio Around the World, a platform that aims to streamline cross-border collaboration on global drug development by sharing real-life practical experience to achieve greater harmonization. So let's welcome Marc. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Echo. I'm very pleased to be here.
So where are you today?
I'm located in Basel, Switzerland. So it is afternoon for us.
Oh, that's yeah. I know the next the Bio Europe conference will be hosted there. So there's the hub of the biotech. So I remember you shared with me. Actually, you started the BioVersys right after you graduated with the PhD.
Yes, that's correct. I actually came first to Switzerland to do my PhD at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. And then from that PhD thesis, we developed a technology platform that led us to create the company quite a few years back now.
So could you share more about your the first time entrepreneur, but actually is also very successful. You have been taking the company from the idea to today in the clinical trial and also made so much progress in this area.
Yes, I think, you know, the beauty in Switzerland is really that there is quite a nice functioning infrastructure for all kinds of high-tech studies or students to actually see if their technology has a potential application in the market. And then there's quite a lot of courses and support organizations, etc., to help us as very young entrepreneurs to get the company off the ground. These are very successful programs, and BioVersys was part of those that helped us certainly a lot to kickstart the company, to identify first investors, etc. And now, yeah, we are, oh my God, nearly 14 years later, we have a clinical stage company with 2 assets in late phase 2 and preparing already for the next steps.
Yeah, and you're not only just in Switzerland, and also I remember you mentioned that you also have the clinical trial sites in China. For such a young company, and it's very unusual. So how was the strategy, and how's the clinical trials going now?
Yeah, I mean, what you see probably behind me is these bacteria on our logo slide, let's say. So you see that BioVersys is fully focused on antimicrobial resistance, so very severe drug-resistant infections. And obviously, this is a global problem, like most of the medicinal products or drugs will address a global audience, let's say. But certainly infections, you know, have also a very big role, unfortunately, in some of the emerging countries and emerging markets. China is no exclusion there. So for us, the Chinese market was always very important from the get-go. And now that we are preparing for global phase 3 studies, we also prepared a company to run and recruit patients, so run this trial also in China and recruit patients there. And it is a requirement that we have a few Chinese subjects, first in a small phase 1 PK study in China before we can then expand into the phase 3 as well. So we just recently initiated the starting interactions with the Chinese NMPA to get going in that preparatory study to then be ready next year for our recruitment in the phase 3 also in China.
Wow, congratulations. And so do you have any other specific regions or countries where you plan to expand your operations or establish a new partnership to enhance your global footprint?
Yeah, look, it depends a little bit which kind of programs we're talking about and so forth. But so BioVersys is headquartered in Switzerland, Basel. We have since many years a wholly owned subsidiary in northern France because we have a strong collaboration with the Pasteur Institute there in Lille and also the University of Lille. We have other research collaborations to continue and evolve our innovation platforms, etc. For instance, in Germany, one of our programs resulted from a collaboration with the University of Southern California. We have many partnerships. We have a large pharmaceutical company as a partner since many years, which is GSK. So partnerships and collaboration is for us very important. And we are quite agnostic on where in the world that happens. I think it's important to be quite open in this and find the partners that you can best work with and achieve your goals. And as mentioned, for us, China is one particular importance because also of the subject that we are addressing with antimicrobial resistance.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You should have mentioned that actually you are very focused and proactively to address the AMR through the innovation. So can you elaborate on your long-term strategy, strategic vision, and particularly how you plan to combat the increased threat of AMR over the next decade?
Yeah, I think, most people in the world will have heard that antimicrobial resistance is really one of the top human health threats that we are facing today. It's very scary to think about the fact that in certain indications or infections, we are already really close to being back to the times prior the invention or the discovery of penicillin, and kind of what the WHO defines as the post-antibiotic era or era. And that's scary because antibiotics are part of the infrastructure that we have in medicine, right? Without access to working antibiotics, a lot of interventions in hospitals become life-threatening again. That can be from very simple procedures like simple surgeries, C-sections, etc., all the way to the modern immuno-oncology treatments. If you don't have access to working antibiotics, this is really difficult to actually do. And unfortunately, we get on that path. Some indications in some countries are already there, actually. And that's one of the interesting parts. Despite this very high unmet medical need, in the, a lot of the pharma industry still says that the returns in terms of monetary returns are not high enough to justify the significant investment needed in the US, for instance, or some of the major markets in Europe. Also, that is slowly but surely changing. I think it's also very important that a company working in that field is very carefully selecting which kind of infection to focus on initially, and also which kind of body sites of the infection. There's significant differences in the unmet medical need there. So I think bottom line is it's an incredibly important innovation area. It's incredibly important that we act on this threat for our healthcare. And then it is very important that we look at this in a very differentiated way to see where are these highest unmet medical needs. And also, again, from a global and partnership perspective, how do we manage and ensure that new drugs get to the patients around the globe as fast as possible in a responsible way? As if I can take the example of China again, here the problem of drug resistance from bacteria is already massive. It is a very large population. At the same time, the Chinese government has reacted and acted to have very good stewardship programs in place to make sure that antibiotics are treated with more care, that they're not freely available everywhere and overused, because all of this thing plays together, and it's very important to have a sustainable use and access to new antibiotics in the future. And all of this plays a role when you act and innovate in that space.
Yes, thanks for that sharing. So this is become the global aware the issues. So we also see like a growing number of the players in this area. So how does BioVersys differentiate itself in terms of technology and partnership and the overall strategy to maintain a competitive or the leading edge in the market?
Yes, I think, you know, there's different strategies, of course, for that. We have new technology or newer technologies like phages. I mean, it's actually a very old technology that came more from, you know, Eastern Europe and also Russia at the time, and is now seeing a little bit of a revival. We see peptides, we see new targets, etc. For BioVersys, it's very important that we come from a 360-degree view on this, and that involves the patient, the usability, cost of goods perspective, and really also that the fact that an antibiotic needs to reach very difficult to penetrate and reach tissues, like the lung, for instance, is one good example for that. And as such, we have we have two actually main technology platforms that we draw programs from. And we focus on small molecules in our pipeline with partially new mode of actions, new targets, new concepts to actually overcome either drug resistance or drug existing targets significantly more efficient. And that's the way we continue to develop these programs. And so far, so good. We have, with 2 phase 2 assets, wonderful results out of the phase 2 trials, not only what safety, in terms of safety, but also in efficacy. So I think we're on a good path with that. And we believe that this is also a path forward in the space.
Okay. So you seem to have the technology and differentiate, and you have been making so much progress now. So you also have the diverse pipeline. So what new area of the research and innovation are you exploring beyond this project to stay at the forefront of AMR treatment?
Yeah, I think for us, it's really key that we have an understanding of the antibacterial space, let's say. So you see that there's several evolutions also happening in that space. Certain bacteria become more relevant than others because they either develop faster resistance or with different differing treatment regimens, particularly in chronic diseases. A great example for that is cystic fibrosis, COPD. If the concomitant medicines change, sometimes also the bacteria that actually are the biggest problem in these kind of patients in the lung partially change. So you have to be on top of that. What happens, the evolution of the relevant pathogens, obviously also on your competitors or other market participants, let's say, because I don't like to say so much competitors. When we look at the antibacterial space, we need actually every company currently still active there to help patients. The pipeline is scarily empty. But to really see, okay, how do I differentiate? How do my molecules differentiate? And what additional benefit do we offer patients and physicians that treat? And this has also to do, again, with treatment guidelines, etc. And if you have this holistically in view, that also informs what are the next pipeline products that you want to bring forward beyond the ones that we have already in advanced studies, of course.
Okay, so because of all your success, you are recently also expanded your Series C financing round and also established the strategic collaboration such as with GSK. So how do you plan to secure the additional funding during this I think it's still the market is down, and the investment to support your ongoing projects and the future pipeline?
Yeah, so currently we are actually quite well financed. It's a difficult time anyway for all biotech. I think we have gone through a little bit of a difficult time period over the last 1.5 to 2 years as the biotech sector overall. At the same time, the antimicrobial resistance space is potentially particularly challenging for fundraising because of a few bad examples in the past on how commercial returns turned out for some of these products. Again, the secret here is the differentiation of the products and exactly the patient groups that you address, where you can show that there is a real market due to the unmet medical need. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, we have a long-term partnership on one of our programs with GSK. This is actually directed against tuberculosis, global health topic. We're really happy with this partnership. We leverage a lot of non-dilutive funding as well, so government grants for financing, for instance, this program. And GSK has even in our last financing round taken a small equity portion. So overall, at this moment in time, we are, yeah, as BioVersys, we have a good financial standing, let's say. We can continue to work. I think the next big challenge will be to obviously finance the full phase 3 program for our other lead asset, which is against very severe hospital infections caused by the gram-negative bacterium Acinetobacter. That will cost us approximately 80 to 100 million, and that will be one of the next steps that we are tackling in the next couple of, let's say, months to advance on the financing for that as well.
Okay, thanks for this all the sharing. Next, I would like to invite you to share more the details about your technology and the pipeline and the next stage. Thanks, Marc.
Thank you, Echo. Yeah, for that, I'm happy to share a few slides and give a bit of background to the audience of the company, to share what we do and where we stand, a few more details. I hope that you see my screen just well like this. And yeah, as mentioned, just a little bit of the background of the company. We have in the middle here the financial background. I mentioned a few of the things. We have overall raised over the years quite a significant amount of equity money. So in dollars, that would be probably around $90 million US. We have significant access to non-dilutive funding, which is government grants from different sources. It is partially from the US via organizations like CARB-X, or also from the European Union. And we have a venture loan facility from the European Investment Bank. You also see the partnership with GSK. I mentioned that recently we updated that and prolonged that basically for a co-development all the way to the finish line for that program where we collaborate. Echo, you asked beforehand about the technology platforms and the technology that we're working on. This kind of evolution tree or growth tree here shows a bit where we're coming from. We started out in the very beginning with one of the platforms that came from my PhD thesis. It's called the TRIC platform for transcriptional regulator inhibitory compounds. So this is basically, in oncology, we know to target mammalian transcription regulators. We as a company are the first one that actually developed molecules that went all the way to phase 2 now in development in bacterial transcription regulator targeting in the form of Alpibacter. We have a follow-on program of this in our pipeline. It's targeting Staphylococcus aureus, but with an angle in atopic dermatitis. And then later throughout the company, we identified our lead asset, BV100, with a collaboration with University of Southern California, derived from the work on that program, actually a new technology platform in-house, which is enzymycin chemistry, and already have also a follow-on program for that technology platform in our pipeline. The way that looks then in the pipeline itself is depicted here. BV100, our lead asset for hospital infections caused by Acinetobacter baumannii. And we focus this on ventilators associated and hospital-acquired pneumonia and bloodstream infections. You see that we are towards the end here of the phase 2 program, have the qualified infectious disease product designation from the FDA, which allows us for fast-track approval, but also 5 years extra market exclusivity. Then we have a second asset that I mentioned before in terms of Alpibacter for tuberculosis. This is partnered with GSK, and obviously we moved that forward as well. We just had actually the high-level readout of the phase 2 that we expect to publish later this year at several conferences, of course, as well. The program has, beyond the QIDP, also the orphan drug status. And then in our earlier stage pipeline, I mentioned the BV200 program on Staph aureus for atopic dermatitis. Here, the innovative part is actually that we don't kill the bacteria anymore, but we disarm them. We deprive them from producing toxins and virulence factors, which has quite a nice effect when looking at atopic dermatitis, because we don't really harm the skin microbiota, but we help it to restore a more normal balance between the normal skin bacteria and Staphylococcus, and thus also help to reduce the amount of flares in these patients, particularly the mild to moderate. And lastly, our newest program is BV500 for non-tuberculosis mycobacteria in cystic fibrosis and COPD. We have several discovery programs ongoing in the background, a lot with also partnerships with different leading universities and institutes in the world. I mentioned Pasteur Institute, but also the German Center for Infectious Diseases is one of our partners, etc. Interesting is when we talk about the need, the WHO runs since a couple of years what they call the priority pathogen list, and that's quite aligned with many of the national pathogen lists. We have obviously the US CDC, but China also runs such priority pathogen lists. And they're often quite scarily aligned, I have to say. But here the WHO recently updated theirs, and the critical group of pathogens, 2 of our lead assets are part of that group. If you dig a bit deeper into that list, you actually find that the WHO also looked at which of these infections have actually the least possible treatment options anymore between all the existing antibiotics. And that includes, of course, generics and also the newly approved ones. And interestingly enough, carbapenem-resistant Acinetobacter and rifampicin-resistant tuberculosis are the least treatable infections that we have today on the planet. And yeah, these are actually our 2 lead assets that we have currently phase 2 trials ongoing. So we're quite happy to hopefully offer solutions for patients here in this very severe and unfortunately difficult to treat infections. On this slide, I think just a background on what I said before as well. Without working antibiotics, not only do we have increased casualty numbers, but I think it is very clear that we unfortunately lose part of the infrastructure of modern medicine. Already today, the second leading cause of death in cancer patients is actually simple infections. And we hear that more and more often from oncologists, that it is incredibly difficult to tell the family of a child with leukemia that actually the leukemia seems to be under control and the patient is kind of on the way of getting better. But then in that very fragile stage after the recovery from the treatment, basically the immune system is so weak, you catch an infection, it is drug resistant, and within 1 or 2 days, the patient dies. That's a very difficult discussion to have with the next of kin of these kind of patients. So it is crucially important that we continue to have access to working antibiotics. There's actually no alternative to that. Despite that difficult or this very high unmet medical need, most of us will have heard about the fact that it's not so easy to commercialize new antibiotics because, of course, one has an incredible amount of generics in the space in terms of competition. There's the stewardship regulations, which are absolutely right to have as long as they're considered as stewardship and not to use new antibiotics. I think they have to be used when it's indicated in a controlled manner. But the way we look at this at BioVersys is that we basically really define the key infections or indications that we focus on by very high resistance levels against standard of care antibiotics. And this is a global average of 40 to 50% against your standard of care antibiotics. And at the same time, we focus only on infections that are immediately life-threatening. So these are usually hospital infections like bloodstream or pneumonia. In tuberculosis, we actually go even all the way to TB meningitis, so infections of the brain in that space. Because here we believe we have clearly such a high unmet medical need, and physicians know that time is of the essence to use the right antibiotic or effective antibiotic that's the niche where really market uptake is the best. I don't go in detail through this slide, but it's also a stepwise approach to commercial success. And one of the important parts here is to avoid gateway indications so that we really focus on these very difficult to treat infections like pneumonia and not urinary tract infections, which is kind of an old standard to get antibiotics to the market, but has very much proven that physicians are not that much in need for new antibiotics in that space. You have to compete to a ton of generics, and normally there's a lot of step-through therapies going on, so not immediately a diagnostic-driven use of the appropriate antibiotic. And that's why we currently clearly focus on these severe hospital infections with pneumonia involved, etc., to actually address a proper market. There's a bit of other change. I want to talk about this at least for a few seconds here. The G7 countries have realized that the combination of a good healthcare system, stewardship regulations, and generic competition has led, of course, to a fact that the reimbursement or the market for new antibiotics has become smaller than it was in the past. And this has also led to quite an exodus of companies working in that space, which is absolutely unhealthy. We run against the wall as humankind by not having access to new antibiotics anymore. And governments are working towards a solution for that, which has to do with reimbursement reforms. And I make this very short, but very crisp. Basically, most governments in the G7 agree that the reimbursement should be delinked from the volume of sales. And the simple way to do that is just the way that we watch TV today, we pay for Netflix, meaning that governments in the future will pay rather than per volume for the antibiotics, for the access to these antibiotics on an annual basis, delink it from the volume of use, have a sustainable use, but still reimburse the industry in a fair and appropriate manner for the innovation that they deliver. Lots of studies go around this. This is a process in the making for roughly 10 years. We now have very clear progress and tangible progress on that because the UK has implemented that kind of reimbursement system already. Japan is running a pilot currently. Japan will implement probably this year. Canada. And then we have Sweden that has a similar system, but needs to update it for the new antibiotics as well, which will come alongside with the European Union acting. In the US, we also have an interesting concept here in place, which is the Pasteur Act. We hope it passes Congress soon because the example is very concrete on how it should work. And basically, a company would get for a new antibiotic anywhere between 75 million to 300 million per year as a lump sum payment to get grant access to the US market for that antibiotic. And the spread between that is addressed by the unmet medical need that one addresses, really. So this is encouraging because it will help in the kind of traditional major pharma markets to make a predictable and clear business case, again, for antibiotics, and partially also for the ones that are for less severe infections, that certainly from a perspective of adequate medical treatment are also needed, but even more challenging, as mentioned beforehand today in the market space. This is also interesting from the perspective of China, for instance, or other countries, because it's relevant to have this really in kind of these G7 countries. If you look at a lot of the other parts of the world, the number of infections with highly drug-resistant bacteria is actually so high that the volume-based play perfectly works again, or still works, excuse me. And this even despite stewardship regulations. So I make that very clear that any company today involved in the development of new antibiotics stands fully behind stewardship, a clear separation between animal health care and human health care, and also a clear surveillance program that these new antibiotics are used only for patients that really need them. I think this is absolutely strong responsibilities of companies working in that space. Maybe I have still time to talk a little bit about our two lead assets, BV100. Why do we choose carbapenem-resistant Acinetobacter as a target? Well, it has incredibly high mortality rates in the intensive care units, 40 to 50% actually. It is absolutely key that physicians go immediately to an appropriate antibiotic that has an effect, because any 6 to 12 hours delay of treating these patients, unfortunately, brings them closer to a very bad outcome. And the sad reality is that Acinetobacter is probably the most resistant pathogen on the planet. Today, we have the resistance against carbapenems. Even the US has 40 to 50%. We have in Southern Europe actually totally devastating numbers of up to 100% resistance against carbapenems. Then the last resort drug that physicians use there, for instance, in Europe, is belonging to the colistin polymyxin class. It's actually more an animal healthcare drug that has made its way back to human therapy, because there is nothing else, quite frankly. And what we now start to realize that obviously countries that use this already since a while, you also have increasing resistant rates against these polymyxin colistin drugs. So we discovered now in one of our trials that in Greece, we are already at 50% colistin resistance. That, by definition, leaves patients without an existing working treatment, and they are considered pan-drug resistant. You can imagine what that means for the patient, and for the mortality rates, they go even higher than what we have been used to already. And yeah, maybe a few words what BV100 is. We base that drug actually on an existing pharmaceutical ingredient that is on the market since the mid-90s. It's called rifabutine. It wasn't known that rifabutine has an effect on gram-negative bacteria, or Acinetobacter in that case. We uncovered together with the University of Southern California that mode of action. It's really interesting because the molecule binds actually to an outer membrane porine, opens that up, and then really promotes its entry to the bacteria, and very efficiently kills the bacteria on the RNA polymerase target, which so far is totally unaddressed by any drug class in gram-negative bacteria. That's also why there's virtually no pre-existing resistance happening. So it's really a nice mode of action that we have. What was now also a big challenge and requirement was that the rifabutine is only available as an oral drug with very poor oral bioavailability. So it's not suitable and not reaching the blood exposures that one needs to treat this kind of infection. And then we actually developed the first human suitable injectable formulation for this drug, have very strong patent protection around that. And we reach now obviously stable exposures in the blood that are about 3 to 6-fold higher than what the oral can. And so we have now a very efficacious drug going forward with a good safety profile as well, bringing that into patients. In animal studies, we did obviously quite a lot of and extensive work to characterize that drug in this kind of infection, different sites of infection in the animal models, as you see here depicted, against standard of care, dose response curves, survival rates, etc. So the drug really works very strongly. We have also the summary of all of these preclinical studies is that it has also very favorable frequency of developing new resistance. Overall, in a nutshell, really speaking about a potential very strong drug going forward into human trials. We have now conducted several phase 1 studies to characterize the drug. We have a very good safety profile, clean safety profile for this injectable formulation. We've done many descriptive studies also around drug-drug interactions, renal impaired patients, hepatic impaired patients. Just about to finish now the bronchoalveolar lavage study for modern lung exposure data. Then we have all of these studies finished, and the great outcome for this is that we have a simple and straightforward dosing 2 times a day, 1 or 2 hour infusion, and in over 200 people that were dosed, good safety profile, and no dose adjustments required for any of the special patient populations. So that's really a usable and great drug going forward in intensive care unit setting. This is the design of our ongoing phase 2 trial. It's in ventilator-associated pneumonia. And what you see here is that we have a part A where we compare against best available therapy. In practice, that actually means it's always colistin background plus 2 additional antibiotics that physicians actually use on these patients to hopefully have some effect on Acinetobacter. And then we allow also a part B in this study where we allow basically as a rescue arm or rescue therapy patients that fail best available therapy to come on our drug and see if we can actually make a difference there as well. And a few of the early outcomes, the trial is randomized controlled, but open label. So we see here kind of an interim readout of 20 patients. We have a clear mortality benefit already against best available therapy. The trend is very clear. Of course, this is with the small patient numbers, not yet statistically significant or relevant, but I think the trend is very clear. And importantly, as we see also in this data of the pneumonia scores, that particularly in the patients that suffered from treatment failure, we actually see that BV100 rescues these patients as well and really treats the infection very efficiently. And the same is true for the microbiological eradication of the drug, of the bacteria, where we see after 3 days already 2/3 of the patients being free from Acinetobacter, and that trend continues into the test of cure. So overall, we're really happy with these results and encouraged. Here's the plan going forward for us into phase 3. We hope that in the first half of 2025, we can initiate these phase 3 programs and studies. I'm just going to go fast now over this. But this will be the global phase 3 trials where we want to include also China as one of the countries where we recruit patients. And I talked about this just before. There is a little bit of competition around in Acinetobacter because of this high unmet medical need. I think we have seen one trailblazing company in that space, which is Entasis, now Innoviva, that has gotten an FDA approval in 2023 for a new lactam-lactamase combination that has good effects on Acinetobacter. Very happy for patients actually that this drug is available. You're going to see on the next slide in treatment guidelines that it's an important drug, certainly not yet the only answer that we have out there. On top of that, Xacduro unfortunately does not have an effect on the metallolactamase resistance mechanisms, which is also quite prevalent in Acinetobacter. And yeah, unfortunately, the drug can't overcome that resistance. We have Roche so basically our neighbors with a very interesting new molecule as well that is still in phase 1 studies going forward for Acinetobacter. We have several smaller companies. Antibio is another lactamase inhibitor, but also here polymyxin analogs that promise to be a bit safer than the actual original polymyxin going forward in early stage clinical trials. As BioVersys, we feel very well positioned because we are now at the end of our phase 2 study already and preparing for, obviously the approval study going forward. I mentioned just a comment on the treatment guidelines. I think it's very important to have these closely in mind when developing new antibiotics. What you see for Acinetobacter, that it's always a combination therapy that is required by guidelines because of that severity of the infection. Here we certainly have a great advantage with BV100 that we see very strong synergy with 2 of the kind of standard of care drugs, which is either the polymyxin class or cefiderocol. We certainly don't have antagonism with anything. We offer a differentiated mode of action from the carbapenems or lactam-lactamase inhibitors, so can also be nicely combined even in non-resistant cases with this drug class to have an important role in the future. I very quickly touch up on this slide. It's a complicated slide, but I want to make that point. The commercial challenges in antibiotics are often driven also by the development paths that companies take and the indications that they later on get on their label. It is crucial to address a true resistance problem for commercial success. We see that in several examples. Avicaz is a good drug that addressed as first a real resistance issue, did a label expansion into the pneumonia part, which is really important. When the MRSA crisis was kind of on its peak and we had only vancomycin left for treating these bacteria, there were 2 new drugs coming out that were also great commercial successes. So I think I want to make a clear bottom line here that anti-infectives sometimes suffer from a too bad reputation that is driven by some examples of commercial failure that potentially also had to do with the development path or potentially the molecules themselves. And if you really address that unmet medical need, which seems to be logic as well, then the uptake of these new drugs is also quite reasonable and actually leading to good commercial outcomes. Echo, I just interrupt here for a second because I'm doing a bit of a monologue. Do we still have time to go through the other program quickly, or how do you want to proceed?
Yes.
Okay.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Echo. Then I quickly speak also a few words about Alpibacter. It's a bit of an unusual program for a lot of biotech companies because it addresses global health. Still, tuberculosis is actually the biggest infectious disease killer in the world. COVID overtook it in the peak year, but that's it. Any other year, tuberculosis wins, unfortunately, that very sad competition. And we still have 1.3 million casualties every year from that disease. So it's far from eradicated. There's totally unaddressed medical needs in tuberculosis like TB meningitis, which is mainly driven by the fact that a lot of antibiotics don't even cross the blood-brain barrier, so they don't reach the target. And these are obviously associated with even higher mortality rates. And we have as a mission really to make a difference here. In the epidemiology that you see here, of course, it's a disease that is more prevalent in the global south. Also in the Asian region. In Europe, we see a lot of comeback, unfortunately, due to the very unfortunate geopolitical situations that we have with wars and all these things. So bottom line is the disease is far from being solved. We have a totally new concept here, which is really a first-in-class molecule. We developed Alpibacter together with an existing tuberculosis drug called ethionamide. Ethionamide is kind of a mainstay in the TB treatment for a long time. It's on the market since more than 60 years. Some of the downsides of the drug is that one needs an incredibly high dose to achieve an effect in TB. Has to do with the mode of action. And in a nutshell, to make a complicated story very easy, what we do with Alpibacter is we have a small molecule that to a certain extent reprograms a few genetic pathways in tuberculosis in the bacteria and leads to the fact that then ethionamide becomes extremely effective at very low doses in the bacteria. And at the same time, we overcome pre-existing resistance. This program is really quite interesting in that sense because it kind of combines the idea of lactam and lactamase inhibitor antibiotics that is arguably the most successful antibiotic class in humankind. It combines that one or picks up that concept with a totally different drug class. And that's also why we have probably GSK since many years as a strong partner with us. This here is the design of our phase 2 trial that we ran together in South Africa. We compare actually our combination ethionamide and Alpibacter at different doses to isoniazid, which is a drug that we purposefully chose as comparator because it is kind of the most fast active drug in any TB regimen and is really the first line treatment since more than 60 years. Thus suffers also mostly from resistance. And our clear aim is here to kind of replace isoniazid with the Alpibacter ethionamide combination that has the same fast cidal activity on the bacteria, but no pre-existing resistance anymore. And the outcome of that trial, it's very fresh. We had only last visit in mid-April. But what we clearly see is that we have a proof of concept in human. We do see that we overcome that we basically have the same effect as isoniazid, partially even better, and does have a very strong new possibility to actually work in future TB regimens. We're going to further develop that drug also together with GSK. We split a little bit the responsibilities. GSK will continue in the pulmonary arena. We will take care a bit more of the TB meningitis arena, and very hopeful and excited to bring that program forward to as many patients as possible in the immediate future. We then on the preclinical pipeline, I mentioned that very quickly, the concept of addressing Staph aureus toxins in atopic dermatitis, and on the other hand, the BV500 development on non-tuberculosis mycobacteria. We clearly aim here at the best in class because we have an ultra broad coverage of all of the subspecies of non-tuberculosis mycobacteria, NTMs, and we also work on an oral delivery of that drug to make it actually very easy for the patient to be compliant and use that drug as an effective treatment. Yeah, I can wrap it up with a few comments on the team. We have a small team at BioVersys. We're overall 25 people advancing this pipeline, but highly experienced people in our leadership team, but also in the overall company that have most of their careers actually spent in antibiotic drug discovery and development. So I'm very proud of that team that we have together. And lastly, I mentioned that several times, we do embrace collaborations, not only with the large pharmaceutical companies, obviously for our more advanced programs, but also in the early stages to have a momentum and continued innovation in that space. We are very passionate about this space. We need new drugs in antibacterials. And for us, global collaboration is really necessary and what we are striving for. Last two slides, I mentioned that we are currently now starting to work on the process of raising significant funds, as you see here in the little pie chart, to basically fund our phase 3 program for BV100. And overall, yeah, if there's partners interested to talk to us also from China, we already set foot in China. We are working on our first phase 1 study, PK study in China with BV100. We are obviously open for partnerships with Chinese companies, but also investors, and moving these important developments and programs forward. So we're really excited to these next steps that are ahead of us.
Thank you, Marc, for the comprehensive introduction of your company and the pipeline, and also congratulations on all your progress successfully. So we collected some of the questions here. And so for the actually BV100 is already in the phase 2 and is going to be the global trial phase 3. And with the new MOA, I think this is actually very challenging to be from the idea to today. And so can you provide the insights into the preclinical or the clinical data that demonstrate its efficacy and safety?
Yes, I mean, again, we have a team of great experts in developing antibacterial drugs. So in that sense, we obviously knew and have done all the relevant studies that are necessary. You saw this very extensive phase 1 program to describe the drug and to be actually ready to go in all the difficult to treat patient populations as well, to ensure that the drug is safe. The efficacy has been proven in nearly countless animal models over the entire MIC range, all of these kind of things. Interesting was here really that discovery. No one expected this drug to work actually on Acinetobacter. That was an interesting discovery led by the University of Southern California that came up with a more particular screen. Actually, the story is published together with us in Nature Microbiology, so one can certainly read that. And then the next step was to identify the mode of action, which also was initially unclear. How is it possible that that drug is so effective? When all of that was established and we saw that the data really translates in the infectious state, so in reality, not only in vitro, the last kind of very important challenge for this was we need that drug to be differently formulated and we need to get it somehow in an IV. And here I have to admit, sometimes with all the efforts you do, you also have to be lucky. Our CSO happened to start his career on that drug class and is quite on a few of these patents that came out at the time. And this is a while back. I'm not going to say the year because maybe he'll get angry with me. But bottom line is that, yeah, he had an incredible knowledge about the drug class, and that helped us to actually be able to make that last step as well. That was super important to get the drug into the status that we can actually deploy it for these patients and patient groups. So when that was handled, we just really pushed forward and developed the entire safety program around the formulation, etc. And yeah, you saw the results. So far, so good. We're really excited about this. We think we have a good path and a clear path forward to bring that drug actually to approval. The clear aim is that the phase 3 trial obviously will be discussed with the FDA, the European agency, but also China NMPA, to have a truly global trial, including then the data set that will be sufficient for all the major agencies.
Yeah. Wow. So also, like, I think that this is very like challenging for the whole industry. And also, when you design your pipeline candidate address how do your pipeline candidates address the mechanism by which bacteria develop the resistance to exist in the antibiotics? Because I think that this is kind of like when you design is very challenging to do that. So how did your team achieve that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think a lot of the audience here will understand that on the one hand, what I said, and antibiotics are absolutely needed, and we have an undisputed unmet medical need in that space. At the same time, the commercial prospect is somewhat challenging, and you have to solve that. So basically, I feel that as a small biotech company, we probably have needed to do significantly more work also into the clear positioning of the drug in treatment regimens. Why would doctors use that? How can it be reimbursed? Which country needs what, etc. So it's actually quite complicated in the end. But we needed, and by the way, in the end, every drug needs that. But for most biotechs in let's say, very hyped topics, I mean, when you're now currently in diabetes weight loss or something, you probably, the main focus is, how do I compare to some of these others? What is my mode of action? Can I really deliver that? How is the safety, etc.? We have to do the same, but also think extremely hard already which indications to focus on and why does that make sense? And we try to invest a lot of time into this and have a clear feeling that we found pathways to address this in a credible way. And I think that's also the reason why we have been able to actually raise the funds to get where we are, because I mean, that is actually for all of our colleagues in antibiotic drug development quite a challenge these days.
So for the BV100, you are going to launch the global trial phase 3. You mentioned about China. Actually, you already have sites in China. And so will you include other regions?
Yes, of course. This is a truly global trial. We anticipate to have, of course, US sites, but also Southern America sites, because the prevalence is extremely high. We're looking at Europe. Currently, our trials are running in Europe, the phase 2 trials. And then Asia, China, so APAC and China. So we have started on feasibility studies to see which countries are best. Sometimes in antibacterial drug development, you have challenges for informed consent, etc., to bring the patients in really fast into the trial. That's key. So these kind of things, we obviously we are aware of these challenges, so we are trying to identify the best countries where we go. There's also a nice, again, collaboration. There is several clinical trial networks around the world that are establishing. We have in Europe a network called ECRADE. We have in Asia a network called Advance ID. So we are discussing and working also with these kind of networks to see that we obviously are efficient with the same, always great quality in terms of data and patient care in these phase 3 trials.
Wow. So it seems the strategic collaboration seems to always play the critical role at your firm. You have mentioned several times, also you just mentioned even the global clinical trial phase 3, you are going to collaborate with some region organizations. So can you provide examples of a successful collaboration and also share your criteria you select your partners?
Well, I mean, honestly, I feel, and I hope our partners would echo that, but I think so. If you look at our tuberculosis asset, I mean, I mentioned GSK as a partner. To be fair, I should, and they were also depicted on the slide, but the Pasteur Institute Lille is also a partner since even slightly before GSK joined that program. But if you think about that program, it was a public-private partnership, and it was, in my view, a role model on how partnerships can work. That doesn't mean it's always straightforward. You have sometimes difficult discussions, you have ups and downs. It's a bit like a good marriage, I guess. But the bottom line is that if your fundamentals are correct, then you can actually make these partnerships work. And yeah, I think taking a program from that is really a first-in-class, totally new concept, lots of challenges on the path, to take that from target identification, from chemical optimization, all the way to successful phase 2 data readout now, makes all of the members in that partnership really happy and proud. We see that we make a benefit or really offer something to patients here. It does require sometimes, as mentioned, really leadership within the individual teams as well to say, yes, we want to make that work together. But the reward is phenomenal because, I mean, one part of that program, for instance, has been supported financially also by the Innovative Medicine Initiative in Europe. And I think it's fair to say that the program was highlighted as one of the more successful ones there, because really this partnership has been able to deliver on the goals pretty much in timelines, despite COVID that hit us during our phase 1 trials and planning of those. So, and we still managed to overcome these challenges. And I think for me, that's really a role model. And that's also why I'm a fan of this, because I see also the benefits of it. There's these challenges that I kind of hinted towards, but the benefit is immense because you have really the knowledge of the different institutions, the let's say the academic curiosity from people like the Pasteur Institute, the biotech agility, I would call that on our side, but also the large pharma experience that GSK delivers in that one. And together, this is actually an immense strength. And yeah, again, I hope that when you ask our colleagues at GSK that they echo that, but for us, it's clearly very fruitful partnership.
Yeah, so I know you're personally actually very passionate about the combat, the rise of the antibiotic resistance. So you are from your introduction, you also shared with the competitors or the players in this area. So how do you see that a company can work? Because I just feel like a company work together to solve this big issue, because this become the from your presentation, this is actually even worse situation or cause more the deaths than the cancer, and how much money we put in the cancer treatment, or how much money we put into this area, actually, I think is not comparable, right? So how do you think in your sector, the players can work together, solve the issue together?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I mean, I even before our call, I double checked this so that I don't cite wrong numbers. But if I look, for instance, at China, the third leading cause of this is antimicrobial resistance. And that's, I mean, it's crazy. It's unacceptable for me that in the year 2024, which is, well, what is it? Probably around 80 years after we discovered penicillin, we are back to a situation that simple infections are becoming life-threatening or actually cause casualties. So we have to act against it. Look, I'm also chair of an organization called Beam Alliance, where we actually unify the small and medium cap enterprises that still work in this field, as much diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics in AMR. I don't see so much the remaining companies in that space as competitors, as much more as combined advocates, and we absolutely need them. I mean, I know, Echo, you also have children. I have them. I think, you know, we are absolutely bound to continue to innovate in that space, because look, bacteria, certainly they are innovating, they want to survive, and they become resistant. That is an absolute natural cause, right? And so we have to fight it. Then collaboration is in multiple ways. I think one collaboration that is remarkable is on the policy side with the G7 governments. How the entire industry speaks with one voice is, for me, remarkable. So what I mean by that is we have the large pharmaceuticals, we have the small and medium-sized, we have the CDMOs, we have the generic manufacturers. All of these companies go to the governments and tell them, look, you have to update the view on reimbursing antibiotics. If you don't do that, we have a big issue. That's one way of collaborating, by the way. In the meantime, we collaborate in the same way with patient organizations, with non-governmental organizations that actually say also the same. We cannot continue as is, and we can also not demand all the time of companies to deliver drugs to low and mid-income countries if we're not even able to pay them in the major markets. So I think that's one way of collaborating. The other way of collaborating is to see how can we be most efficient to bring these drugs forward. How can we do the right clinical trials so that physicians understand why the new drug is potentially better than a combination of 3 or 4 generics with certain resistance mechanisms, etc. And so this is a whole package. Unfortunately, well, it's not a simple answer, but there's in nearly every way of developing a new antibiotic, there's room and reason for collaboration. And that's why we are a big fan of this. And we see that a lot. I mean, we are not the only company that collaborates in that space. I think that's really the way to go. And that's why we're very open for that.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you so much for such a passionate conclusion of the webinar. I think this definitely delivers a strong message and how the industry, actually people should pay attention and work together to compound, just like you said, it's just like not acceptable, like not just for even like my father just had such issue. I just cannot believe why this can be the big issue. So I'm just cannot express enough the gratitude. The people like you, scientists like you, really dedicated, you seriously just dedicated your life to this area since you graduate all from the education. So thanks again for you joining the webinar, and thanks everyone. And so if you have any question or comments or want to follow up, please email us or Marc directly. So we would love to continue this conversation. I know you're going to have a big news to announce, so we cannot wait. Thank you again.
Thank you, Echo, for this great opportunity to talk on this webinar. And thank you for MSQ also for the support in actually making collaborations happen. So thanks a lot for that.
Thank you. Okay, bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.
You too.